Hi there, I'm Jessica Parker,
I'm Kimberly Becker.
and this is Women Talking About AI. Kimberly and I, funny enough, we started a podcast last year and we abandoned that project because it was a lot of work. But we now feel that we're ready to commit to a podcast. I think our motivation for this is we're having a lot of the same conversations about AI in these one-on-one meetings, and we figured if there's a way to just share what we're learning to reach more people, then perhaps this would be a good use of our time. I'll just say we chose the title. If you're an Amy Poehler fan, she has a satire podcast about the true crime podcast genre, and it's called Women Talking About Murder. And so that's what gave us the idea for this, because we want this to be approachable. Even though we're academics, we're still normal people. We're not computer scientists. We're not AI experts. We're just curious about AI and we're really passionate about it. So we're going to talk about AI. We're going to try to demystify it a bit for those of you who are also non-computer scientists or curious about AI, but we're also just going to sometimes go off on a tangent and talk about other things in our lives. Kimberly, anything you want to add?
No, just like that we became obsessed with AI. I've always been obsessed with language, and so that just added a little bit more to my background. But yeah, a lot of people now are positioning themselves as AI experts, and I don't think we are trying to do that. We're just like very enthusiastic about it, and we're just nerdy, and we got excited about how we could use it to give feedback rather than generate. Immediately, I didn't think, oh, I'm going to generate. I thought immediately about feedback.
Yeah, and I've learned so much from you. Why don't you just tell folks a little bit about your background as a linguist? Because I'll admit, when I met you like 2-ish years ago to work on that Writing Center project together, I didn't know what a linguist was.
There's two kinds of linguists. There's theoretical linguists who study language just to understand how it works as a science. And then there's applied linguists, and I'm in that latter category. We study language so that we can apply it to something. Usually it's language learning, like understanding how the science of language works so we can explain it to people who want to learn it, a second, third, fourth language. Or for computational linguists, it is using the application of the science to do some sort of technical feat like Grammarly or Siri or any of those technical applications that we've had. And of course, AI fits into that too. But that, for me, that's why I was trained as a corpus linguist and never really thought that I wanted to be heavy into the research. Mostly was interested in applying it. And I did a lot of data-driven learning with my students, my international students, teaching them how to learn patterns through a corpus, which is basically what an AI uses to generate text. It's a big corpus. So yeah, that's how I got interested in it, because I was always doing that on a much, much smaller scale.
Yeah, I remember when we did our first study together, we had just discovered GPT-3, I think it was. And I remember sitting down with you and we were in ChatGPT, just really just learning about what its capabilities were. And it was interesting because we kept getting these ideas and we were like, can it do that? And it could. We're like, okay, where do we even start from a research perspective? And I think that's what is honestly what's so fun. It's such a new field and everything is very exploratory right now. And so from a researcher's perspective, it's like the sky is the limit in terms of just learning what it can do in the context of what we do, which is very much doctoral education, graduate education, writing pedagogy. And that really started it all. That first article we were looking at ChatGPT for automated writing evaluation.
Yeah. And now I'm using it to extend my research that I did for my dissertation, which was classifying graduate student coursework writing into kind of solid categories or genres. I call them registers because that's the field that I work in, but understanding the way a text works is a way to teach. And so that's, again, that applied idea of if we know what the reader is expecting, then we can understand better how to produce it. So I did it myself, categorizing text, and now I'm using AI to see if the AI, specifically Claude 3.5 Sonnet, can classify the text. And so far I'm getting about a 77% agreement rate.
Yeah, and that's pretty good. I think where Yeah, I think when people are disappointed by AI, it's because they're not setting their expectations appropriately. At least right now, it's not 100% at everything. And so if you go in expecting it to be perfect and give you 100% accurate or precise responses, then you're going to be disappointed. And so setting those expectations, I feel like that's a big part of our conversation with our users and with other faculty is what are you expecting here? Perhaps that's why you're disappointed. And that's precisely why we don't like to use it for generation. We rather position the human as a co-collaborator with AI. And I think that when you understand its limitations, then you're much better positioned to collaborate with it and leverage it in ways that actually take advantage of what it's good at, and you're not disappointed in the output.
Yeah, I think that's because people are pitching it as like this efficiency thing, this tool that's going to speed up your workflow and maximize your productivity. And really, if you're using it right, it might take you longer, especially in the beginning, because you're trying to do a task that already takes you time, plus you're learning this new technology, even though it's a very simple technology. What people underestimate is the need to like this repeated. And usually what I find with people who haven't liked the output is how many times did you try again? Because it usually takes certainly more than one time to get what you want out of it, especially if you're not giving it a very detail-rich prompt.
Yeah, I think I told you recently I was on a long flight back from Vancouver. And of course, I was sitting beside a man who was on his laptop and he was using GPT-4 Omni. I try not to be nosy. I'm not usually reading other people's emails or text messages, but I couldn't help myself. I was in the middle seat, so I was very.
It was right there.
And he was using GPT-4 Omni to produce, it was a pretty quite complex engineering paper. I was actually learning a bit, but what was fascinating to me is he wrote this really long, detailed prompt. GPT-4 Omni produced the output, which was quite long. And then he did not iterate with it that I saw. He spent most of the flight reading it and then copying and pasting it and editing it in a Word document. So there was no back and forth interaction. It was just the output. And that's what has really surprised you and I when we meet with our users is we're shocked that they don't go and use the chat feature because it is a chat bot. So for us, it's been very fascinating because to me, that's where most of the benefit is. It's not just that initial output, it's that iterative component. And that really drove it home to me because it was clear that this person I was sitting beside was educated and very smart. This is a complex engineering topic. Say, come on, just ask some follow-up questions or some feedback. Like you can get so much more out of it when you really take advantage of that chat feature. And when I talk to my students about it, we're about to do our course overview orientation. I just use the example of like how you talk to a human. And so when I'm telling my students how to use AI for feedback or brainstorming, I say you wouldn't walk into my office and just blurt out something and then get a response from me and walk away. Like that's really awkward. That would be a very awkward human interaction. And I think with an AI chatbot, it's the same. Like you don't just blurt out your initial request, get a response, and then walk away from the conversation. You get the most benefit when you can ask those follow-up questions.
Yeah, but that's what we've been doing for all these years with tech. We give it a direction. We get, whether that's clicking a button or it's not usually that we type out a prompt. If you think about Excel, for example, you type in a formula and it does its thing. You don't have to iterate if you did it right. If you did it wrong, it tells you. But that's the problem, is that it doesn't, like an AI chatbot won't tell you if you've done something wrong or if it doesn't understand. It's still going to give you an output no matter what. And I think that's what trips people up. They're used to this give and take. It's, I'm going to give you this thing that I know you want, and you're going to give me this exact answer. And it's just a totally different strategy for communicating with a machine than we've ever had before.
Yeah, because software is typically binary. You have these pre-programmed rules where, and again, we're non-computer scientists, but I've learned a lot where with programming, you're telling it ahead of time what the rule is and how it should behave based on this command. And there isn't that iteration. And that is definitely what is vastly different with AI. It's all about the interaction, that meaning negotiation that we uncovered through the research I did with my grad students. And that's where the benefit is, that negotiation. And so I think what a lot of people are learning just through prompt engineering is you have to be a good communicator to get what you want out of the AI. You have to have some clarity around what you want to say, who the audience is, what your goals are. Otherwise, if you go in without that clarity, then you're probably not going to get exactly what you're looking for in that interaction. And it's the same with communicating with a human.
Yeah, that's why people are saying these are not skills that typical techie people, if we can categorize people in that way, have. It's more soft skills. So I've heard a lot about English majors. This is your time to shine. Earlier, you mentioned our users, and I don't know if we've explained like who are our users and what is Moxie?
Kimberly and I launched Moxie late last year after having worked together for about a year on another project that involved a virtual academic writing center. We were trying to scale the one-on-one support that students typically get in a university writing center, and we were really struggling. And when we started using generative AI, we saw a potential opportunity to scale that one-on-one or group writing support that we were giving to graduate students. And that's really what started all this. We started out as Academic Insight Lab. That's what the name of the writing center was. And then we pivoted to Moxie earlier this year. But basically what Moxie does is they're generative AI tools that Kimberly and I personally build to provide formative feedback and guidance to emerging and experienced researchers. And the tools follow the genre of a research article in terms of we have an introduction, we have the methods, we have the results and the discussion, and then we have some other components built in because typically a grad student is writing a full lit review that isn't normally broken out into in a separate section of a research article. We also have tools for grant reviewers, for grant writing, and so it's very much heavily research and academic writing focused. And it's been an interesting journey. I think if we hopefully will continue doing this podcast and talk more about our journey building Moxie. But we've learned a lot from our users. We meet with our users every week, and we learn a lot about what their expectations are, what the misconceptions are. We meet with faculty. And so that's part of those learnings or what we would love to share on this platform.
Yeah, because I think one thing that like makes us different, what I've noticed in listening to other people who are like champions for AI is often they'll talk about AI as if it's this easy thing. Like you just talk to it like it's a chatbot, as if that is accessible for everybody. Even with neurodivergence and learning differences aside, people don't know, like we were talking about, they don't know how to iterate. They don't know how to interact. They don't know how to ask for what they want. And so when we meet with our users, we see them using it. We ask them, show us what you're doing, or where are you running into trouble? And it's almost always that their expectations are misaligned with what the bot is designed to do. Whether that be assuming that because it's called a research tool, it's going to generate perfect citations, not understanding that we certainly have guardrails in place, but we cannot prevent an AI. Nobody can prevent an AI from hallucinating. And so I think that's one benefit that's one way I've learned the most is through those Moxie meetups every Wednesday, seeing where users hit trouble spots and then trying to help them get through that.
I think the best advice is just to use it. I met with a faculty member last week and they were pretty overwhelmed about where to start. And what became clear in the beginning of our conversation was that they weren't a super user. And I just said, listen, you can't expect your students to use it in these specific ways if you haven't done that yet. And so I think my first piece of advice to anyone who's really struggling to wrap their head around how it works or trying to understand how to use it either in their own workflows or teach others how to use it is first you need to use it yourself every day for many different things, for lots of different tasks. And so I have Claude 3.5 Sonnet up all the time. I'm constantly brainstorming with it, but it's through those interactions that I've learned what it's good at and what it's bad at. And I think because we're so used to this software paradigm, it's challenging because these large language models are very confident. And like you said, they're not going to admit usually that they don't know something. They're designed to do what you want them to do, to give you something. And so the fact that they're overly confident and they tend to hallucinate, people are having, I think, a hard time wrapping their head around that. But it's not binary. It's not okay, well, just because it's not 100% good at this means that you can't use it at all. It's just a matter of understanding when it's appropriate or not to use it based on the use case. And we talk a lot about stakes. Is this high stakes? Is this low stakes? So from an education perspective, it, yes, depends on the learning objectives, how you're assessing learning. But I think I always start with just discussion posts because those are low stakes. Students are not being graded on discussion posts. So if you're teaching online, I think integrating it into discussion posts is a great way to not only teach your students how to use generative AI, but also to just get ideas about how they're using it and what they're struggling with so that you can iterate throughout the course and the following semester.
Yeah, I think there was a time in the world of rhetoric a few years back where reflections were really a fad. I don't want to say fad. In pedagogy, things come and go. And I'm not in that world anymore, but I know that at the time I was at Iowa State and we were using a lot of reflective writing. We were having the students do lots and lots of reflection. So they would write something and then they would reflect about it to get that those metacognitive aspects of the brain working. And I think that's really important with AI to ask and to get students to reflect on what they've done and what worked and what didn't, to really get them thinking about not just using it and then putting that output out there, but considering it, really critically approaching it with what worked and what didn't, because they are going to use it. It's not a matter of they are using it now, and it's silly to try to prevent it. I think it's just not for me, it's not the right way to go to try to prevent it or detect it or ban it or some extreme response.
Yeah, it's not realistic. And then you're just going to create an environment where your students are not going to be comfortable asking questions about when it's appropriate to use it or when it's going to create an environment of them trying to hide it. There's going to be no transparency. Back to your point about reflection, what it's really highlighted is the importance of process, not product. And unfortunately, it does require faculty to rethink assessment strategies. Like I have gone in and redesigned all of my rubrics, and I've really shifted a lot of the focus to the process and reflecting on the process versus sending in that final product for grading. And so a lot more formative assessment with process built in. Even though these are doctoral writers and writing is often the product, I've had to spend a lot of time rethinking how I'm assessing learning. And I understand that is a tall order for most faculty. So I totally get the tendency to be resistant. It's now I have to do this. Now I have to rethink my entire course. It's so much easier to just ban it. So I don't want to come across as like thinking that those faculty are doing something wrong. I get that it's a lot to ask, but I think it's inevitable. We know that AI detectors are not accurate. They produce a lot of false positives and false negatives. I remember we were preparing for a webinar recently, and I went in and I was testing out some of the detectors, and I fed it an article. I uploaded an article that I wrote years ago before generative AI existed, and it said it was 100% AI generated. And I would just hate to accuse a student of generating a paper with AI. And I just think it's too risky using these AI detectors. So we just have to get more creative. And the good news is that there's a whole emerging field of research on this where people are publishing papers to show us how they're changing up their assessment methods. There's different scales coming out to guide faculty. So the resources are there. You just have to look for them and be open to shifting what you're typically doing, open to change.
One of the reasons that the writing center that we were trying to form, the online writing center, is we had set times for group coaching and meetings for accountability and such, and those times didn't always work for people. And once we had the AI chatbots that did the coaching for us, we started hearing people say, oh, this is much more convenient because then it's right there when I'm working 2 in the morning or whenever it is. And the reason that faculty don't give feedback is because they're already overworked. And when I was a professor, I didn't have time to give the kind of feedback that I really wanted and needed to give that would benefit the students to the extent that I wanted to. And that's frustrating because most of us go into this because we do love teaching, and even the research heavy faculty members, I know they appreciate learning from the students. And of course, for me, I learn the most when I'm teaching. And yeah, it just, if we can see it as a formative feedback tool rather than a generative thing that just creates a product that we're going to repurpose for our own deliverable, then it really can, faculty can get a better product in the end if they're not going to have time to do this kind of iterative formative feedback. That really needs to happen, but nobody has time for. So those are the things those are the kind of human problems that we've been able to address to some extent with this. Of course, it's not perfect, but it's a way to mitigate it.
Yeah, not only that, but I was telling you this the other day, how you think about the typical assessment process where a student I work with doctoral students, so I'll use this example. They'll write a paper, like their lit review, for instance. I have a course where I teach the lit review. They write a lit review, and then I might spend 2 hours giving them really extensive feedback, but then they get that grade. And unless they're redoing that lit review, they're not even looking at my feedback. They just want to know if they failed, they want to know how they can improve. And then maybe they're going to take time to really internalize that feedback and do something with it. But otherwise, especially those who do well, it's okay, move on, next assignment.
Yeah.
And where I think the generative AI for formative feedback is really helpful. Sure, the students have to plan ahead, so they can't wait to the last minute to get these benefits, but they're able to get that feedback and try to close the gap on their own. And so it's like a different relationship with feedback for them. And then there's no dumb questions. So I find that it's changing my students' relationship with feedback. And then because I'm designing the tools to use the same criteria that I'm using to assess their learning, it reinforces that learning because it's restating, okay, this is the standard for good performance. And that's just an entirely different relationship with feedback than many students, I think, are used to. And that's not even about saving me time. It's like it gives the student an opportunity to actually think about what to do with that feedback and implement it. Whereas before, I can't pre-grade every assignment.
No,
it's just that's not how it works. So I think that's this added benefit that a lot of people I don't think are talking about.
And when you interviewed your students for that study that's coming out later this year, what I noticed is that they were saying things like, I never really understood what coherence was, or I didn't know what anthropomorphizing was, but now I do, because they could ask the machine, which wasn't embarrassing. There was no power dynamic. There is no power dynamic other than fear of technology, which is a real thing. There wasn't that power dynamic of, I don't really know what she means by coherence, but I don't want to ask her because I should know. I'm a doctoral student.
And they could look it up in their textbook, but they're not going to get feedback from their textbook in the context of what their topic is.
And they won't understand it unless it's in their context. It's just like when we are taking methodology classes, we can learn those stats, we can learn those methods and explain what they mean and how to do them. But until we apply it in our own research, in our own context, we never really get it in the same sense. And so it's in that act of actually writing their paper, not hearing about coherence as an idea in class, but actually applying it or not, and then hearing from a machine, for example, that they didn't apply it. And then they can say, I don't know what that means, or the machine has time to quickly output an explanation and point out in their writing where exactly it has gone wrong.
Yeah, not only that, but it gave them an opportunity to identify the limitations of generative AI. And so I talk about that with faculty when they're trying to make decisions about how to integrate it into their course. And I'm like, it's not just about the specific use case, it's also about teaching AI literacy. And so what my students quickly learned is that it's not always accurate. And sometimes it would not pick up on issues that I picked up on. And so the idea is never for them to use that as their only source of feedback and take everything at face value. But this is part of critical thinking skills that we want our students to have. It's just now in the context of AI literacy, and it still applies. But again, I think because we've all been in this software paradigm for so long, like you wouldn't necessarily question, I know Grammarly now has generative AI built in, but before you wouldn't necessarily argue with Grammarly's suggestions for the
Well, I would, but it's different.
what I could tell my students would a lot of times just like accept everything and not
Yes.
really read it.
Yes.
And I don't want them doing that. I want them
No.
to really critically think about the feedback they're getting from the AI and then explain in their reflection like what they decided to implement or not and what they learned through that. Okay, sorry, I'm just looking at the time. I know that you have lots of things to do today, Kimberly. So we've done an intro. We've talked very busy. We've talked a lot about different aspects of AI, but I think to end the discussion, what we'd like to do is where I would just like to do a pit or peach moment. Share a pit or peach of your week. And for those of you who are not familiar with this, so this is something that I learned from my partner who does it with his kids, where at the end of the day, they sit down and they say, what was your pit and peach of the day? It's just a nice way to get a lowdown on someone's day, but we're not going to be filming this every day. So I'd love to know, Kimberly, what was your pit and peach of the week? And then we'll close out.
Oh, I have a 19-year-old son, and he just went back to college for his sophomore year. And so I've been like reflecting on my career as a parent, and it's been a deep dive in my head into, is he prepared, and have I taught him the things he needs to go out in the world on his own? His freshman year, he was in a dorm and it was very locked down, and now he's still in a dorm, but it's more apartment style. There's a lot more freedom. There's a kitchen in there. He's gonna burn it down. Like just silly things like that, but also just more deep things. So for me, it's been a very, I don't know, a very like week of reflection, and I don't know. So I guess that's my pit, because he left yesterday and I was like, oh, is he ready for this? Yeah. And of course, as he left, I was like telling him, do not use ChatGPT for, if you're going to use an AI, at least use Perplexity. It cites its sources. And I showed him how to change the focus on Perplexity so that he could limit it to academic or web or social. I showed him those kind of functional things that he needs to know in an academic environment. So I do feel that I prepared him for the new landscape of AI in academia. Somewhat. I did my job there.
So is that your pit and your peach? Are you like, no, but happy to see him go?
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely happy to. He knows we are like, it's time for you to
Go back to school.
Because that's that age where everything, your parents don't know anything. Yeah, I guess that's both. It's a double-edged sword for me.
Yeah, I don't know what I would do if I had, even at this age, I don't think my mother would welcome me back home for an entire summer. I just don't think we need to spend much time together.
No. Yeah.
Pit and peach of my week. You are related to my pit.
Oh boy.
I'll give a little bit of context. Kimberly came to visit me. She comes to visit me quite a bit, but on her last visit, she introduced me to these really amazing wipes that smell like rose water. They're very nice smelling. And I'll just let you imagine what kind of wipes these are. And so since then, I have been using them and unfortunately have had two major plumbing issues. I thought the worst was over. The first plumbing issue, Kimberly says she told me, I'm sending her a bill, my plumbing bill.
Dude. Actually, does it?
No, I think it says it's fine. The plumber himself was like, these keep us in business.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, new septic system this week. Quite expensive. That was my pit. And my peach was, honestly, we had amazing weather in North Carolina this week. Mm-hmm. We finally broke our 100% humidity, 100-degree streak. And so I could actually walk my dog again this week. So I've been walking every day again, which honestly is important for my sanity. I sit at this computer almost all day, every day. And so having the weather decent again was definitely a highlight of the week.
Yes, that was definitely a highlight.
Yeah. All right. Hopefully this podcast was helpful to you guys. Hopefully you learned something, and join us back next week for more on our perspective on AI through the lens of to women and non-computer scientists.